Welcome to the Sun Cure series, Restoring the Lost Art of Light as Medicine. I am John Everblest. This is a multi-part series on sunlight which offers a unique and wildly radical approach. We're going to actually believe God when he pronounced sunlight good. Therefore, this presentation will set aside the standard fear-mongering theories of this age and present the truth found in practical history, the Bible, and only that science which is in harmony with the Word of God. This series strives to release men from the long-held myths about sunlight and to inspire the viewers with the beautiful truth, the magnificent, unbelievable healing power of God's light. The eye-opening events surrounding the pandemic has awakened a movement around the world leading away from pharmaceuticals and toward the healing agencies of nature. The time is now ripe for restoring the lost art of light as medicine. The Sun Cure movement is the presentation today. Amazing health recovery stories from the pioneers of sunlight therapy, also known as heliotherapy. The mind-boggling medical madness of end-time current events has taught us that soon the only health care that will be available to us will be God's healing agencies of nature, and that we must learn to wield its power while we still can, especially sunlight. The stories of history show us how to do that. Tuberculosis was one of the deadliest diseases in human history and was considered incurable until someone finally tried sunlight. Yet the pioneer practitioners of heliotherapy discovered that the sun cure could do far greater things than merely cure a multi-generational disease. The magnificent, unbelievable things that sunlight was given power to do was clear evidence of an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful, loving God at work behind it all. God pronounced sunlight good. These men, they proved it. Okay, here we go. We start with a very famous quote, the earliest recorded words in human history. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light, and God saw that light, that it was good. To demonstrate just how good, God placed Adam and Eve in a garden, in the sunlight, all day, every day, naked. Yet the so-called medical science that God's sunlight causes disease tenaciously persists. Therefore, we will let the stories of history provide the evidence to vindicate God when he says that sunlight is good. Since God's word is never wrong, we would expect to see a pattern of health and recovery associated with sunlight and a pattern of disease and death associated with its absence, right? Okay, the best place to start looking for such a pattern is in the history of the war on TB, because sunlight and fresh air were found to be the two primary countermeasures for tuberculosis. And who better to tell what sunlight can really do for our health than the pioneer men of science, the physicians who wielded it daily in the treatment of countless patients worldwide. Their medical expertise in light therapeutics are unequaled in this generation. Their knowledge represents lifetimes of practical, hands-on, in the trenches, life and death, battle-scarred experience. In the context of these amazing pioneer practitioners of heliotherapy, today's merchants of pharmakeia simply embarrass themselves when they try to proclaim that God's sunlight causes disease. Even the Bible has a warning to them. Woe unto them who call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness. Isaiah 5:20. TB was known as the Great White Plague, the White Death and Consumption. It was highly infectious. and was considered to be one of the deadliest diseases in human history. During the late 19th century, tuberculosis accounted for about 20% of all deaths. And TB is still active around the world. Unlike other infectious diseases or plagues, tuberculosis did not make a sudden appearance, devastate a population, and quickly die off. No. Instead, it infected a person over a period of years or decades through alternating cycles of sharp attacks and remissions. Symptoms could appear weeks or years after exposure. Finally, the war on TB organized. In the latter part of the 19th century, states and nations finally began to work together to eradicate TB, to find its causes, treatment, and prevention. They found that TB thrived within the poverty-stricken city dwellers, 1, in close quarters, 2, in unsanitary conditions, and deficient in nutrition, fresh air, and sunlight. The organized war on TB found that sunlight and open-air living both reversed and prevented TB. Now, over time, this organized movement produced all kinds of very interesting options to get fresh air and sunlight. So, most everything that you're about to see is practical applications of our health message, of God's healthcare system. As we said, soon we will not have access to the world's healthcare system. We may very well be living like what I'm about to show you. This section has real-life, modern-day, end-time application to medical missionaries and to ourselves and families. The following historical images and stories are showing the escape route from away from pharmaceuticals, supplements, and even surgeries. All right, here we go. Number 1, open-air TB sanitariums. This one is Weimar Joint Sanitarium. Weimar used to be, before Weimar was a lifestyle center, it was a open-air TB facility. The old buildings were filled with windows that opened wide. Number 2, open-air TB tent colonies. This was big. Patients with infectious diseases tend to recover much faster in tents than inside hospitals. My presentation called Eden, God's Magnificent Outdoor Healthcare System, goes into detail on this, lots of it. This setup here seems to be ideal for housing the sick, and it's very affordable. Now, practical application to ourselves with what you're looking at right here. If God blessed you with property and means, what you see here could start out as a glamorous camping business. Eventually, it can move on to a health vacation, then turn into an open-air sanitarium or a working colony, and ultimately a refuge for the persecuted. God said we're going to be tested on that, by the way. Third option, preventoriums for children at high risk for TB. So at-risk children were taken from their homes and placed in preventoriums. It's kind of self-explanatory there. To strengthen their immune systems to prevent TB. These were worldwide, and this one was in France. When the child's immune system and health was visibly and measurably better and stronger, they sent them home. Number 4, there were light institutes around the world. There were light departments. This one's at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. This one's one of my favorites. Sunbathing pavilions with ultraviolet transmitting glass. Isn't that interesting? They used to make that. Now it's ultraviolet transmitting plastic. Hard to find, exceedingly expensive. This is the ideal building for building our health. Now, just so you know, common window glass filters out about 86% of ultraviolet light. And that's just single pane, untinted window glass. The building you're looking at right here, the windows open wide up. This was a very health building. Number 7, rotating sunbathing huts. This hut could be turned to follow the sun. It could block the cold wind if desired. This one is on the roof of a children's hospital in England. This idea that you see right here was born out of the necessity caused by city living. Number 9, open-air sleeping rooms or porches where people slept at night. This sleeping room was at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. Open-air tents were also an option for patients at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. They were requirements for patients with infectious disease, which included TB. This is my idea of a sleeping room, sunroom. Look at that, translucent roof as well. Very open air, very nice. Number 10, backyard open air isolation tents. Number 11, fresh air window tents or pipes used at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. They were advertised in health magazines as well. Now this next one is one of my favorites. Number 12, supervised sunshine playground. This was on Dr. Kellogg's property. It was a preventorium in the form of a playground. The modern application for such a thing like this, wellness day camps, wellness summer camps. Children were medically examined and monitored. They were offered health classes. This is bandaging, looks like first aid. They were offered agricultural training, which was part of their health care. Given sunbathing and swimming time, it was a playground. Dr. Kellogg created the playground for his own children first. When they grew up, he called it the Sunshine Playground and opened it for the use and the health of the neighborhood children. It was the most popular playground in all of Battle Creek. No one else was doing this on planet Earth. This wasn't just teaching the children theories of good health practices. It was good health practices. Now, there is a work going on in our church where we are teaching children health principles. And then there's the work of providing them tangible, enjoyable, hands-on, practical options to live God's healing principles. That was the Sunshine Playground. This playground was surrounded by privacy fencing, and children were enabled to obtain near full-body sun exposure. Boys and girls were separated. Apparently this is a snack time. No explanation came with this photo. This is the deer park connected with that Sunshine Playground. This was also on Dr. Kellogg's property. Dr. Kellogg said small children ought to wear as little as possible in the summer so as to allow the bodies to become well-browned in contact with sunlight and air. But when that's not practical, he recommended this. Growing children, invalids, and persons compelled to live indoors would be especially benefited by the wearing of white clothing. I go into that in more detail in another one of my presentations. He has a lot to say on that. They were offered practical skills. This was a service that also kept them there longer in the open air and sunlight. All right, moving on to number 13. Women's private beach solariums. Isn't that interesting? This is a very practical and important option. Notice the words curative and life-giving. They were familiar with the true nature of sunlight. They were also familiar with modesty. Yes, folks, there was a time when this culture, this society, remembered how to blush. Number 14, open-air gymnasiums with private fencing. This was at the Battle Creek Sanitarium. This is one little corner of that very, very big open-air gymnasium. The Battle Creek Sanitarium was the greatest hygienic healthcare institution that has ever been. It was the largest and most well-equipped, had the greatest physician in our world, was raised up at God's command, had over 1,000 different baths and therapies, yet sunlight was considered to be one of the most effective treatments they had. Dr. Kellogg's open-air gymnasium included things like useful labor and hot sand baths. Useful labor there, see them chopping wood. Physical activities, games, in this case, sports. Sunbathing and group exercises. An outdoor mechanical gym, just like at the Dr. Kellogg Discovery Center in Battle Creek. An outdoor pool, and that was the last one for Battle Creek. All right, number 15, indoor sunbathing beaches. This one, I believe, was in France. Now that should be giving us some ideas, huh? I'm working on such a thing. This is my favorite. Number 16, indoor sunbathing cafe and juice bar. This was on top of a New Jersey skyscraper. Sun lamps, heat lamps, and sky lamps, and probably Vita-glass UV transmitting windows. It had a juice bar, ice cream, and an amazing view. You notice that nurse back there in the left far corner? Yeah, it was probably government regulated that way. Now we wouldn't even get away with that. Number 17, open-air ferries as tuberculosis camps, day camps. 18, oh, this is another one of my favorites, the Sea Cure, Sun Cure open-air schools. I believe this one is in Santa Monica, California. Open-air schools became a worldwide practice year-round, hot or cold, and the results were fabulous. We desperately need to get back to this type of thinking. Having an open-air school at the beach offered added benefits due to the constantly moving water, which generated healing negative ions. And you notice those bare feet? That means these children were grounded too. Number 19, open-air health camps for children. Sounds like a good idea for a new type of health-promoting summer camp experience. What do you think? 20, even open-air school buses. Now, out of all these sun cure providers, one stands high above all of them. Dr. Auguste Rollier. He had 36 sun cure clinics in the town of Leysen, Switzerland. Now we are really going to see practical application of sunlight as medicine. Dr. Kellogg had 2 extended stays here to learn heliotherapy from this undisputed master of sunlight therapy. Dr. Rollier opened his first high-altitude TB clinic in 1903 in the Swiss Alps. He specialized in surgical TB cases and called his program the Sun Cure, La Cure du Soleil in French, like I can speak it. This was his first building, Le Chalet, the first of Dr. Rollier's 36 TB clinics. Eventually, most of the buildings in Leysen were used for Dr. Rollier's Sun Cure clinics. Any space that could be found. This particular clinic is on top of a tiny strip mall in the village. All right, what's the principle here? We use whatever God has placed in our hands. Now, this description that I'm about to read here of what you're looking at is from Facts from Artificial Sunlight from 1927 by a doctor. All right. For your information, this image is a sun cure clinic in Germany, not Leysen. This is not a Rollier clinic, but this image gives the scope of it in one view. They use the same principles, though. The following is a quote from that doctor. Here it is. Many of the results obtained at Leysen in the cure of TB and other persistent disorders of health have been little short of miraculous. Terrible ulcerations, debilitating abscesses, and nerve-destroying weaknesses have vanished under the magic of the sun's rays. Scientifically applied. Spines softened by tuberculosis so that they were of no more use for support than had they been made of putty, have been made whole. Disorganized joints and limbs, distorted in apparently hopeless confusion of natural function, have been made straight. Lungs so rotten with tubercle that they had burst through the chest wall itself have healed, and the terrible wounds resulting have closed up. Little children, crippled and carious, have been made strong, whilst in other forms consumption has yielded to the sun cure as well. The treatment was slow but extremely effective. I'm talking about TB. TB is an infectious disease, and we're going to have a lot more of those infectious diseases, and we're going to be on our own. So we need to start paying attention to this sort of stuff, sharing our puzzle pieces. All right, the sun cure had an 84% cure rate on dreadful surgical TB. Patients who were close to death. This was accomplished without the expected maiming, risky surgeries of the day. He did this in an era when TB was still considered incurable by mainstream medicines. He used only the healing agencies of nature. Even with these kind of provable public results, this sun cure, this was still resisted by mainstream medicine practitioners, as it is today. Not a few were confined to bed for months on end. What does that do to our bodies? Oh my word. Conditions like spondylitis, inflamed spine, and or ankylosis, stiff or fused spines, required complete immobilization. Some required traction, splints, or casts. Patients were rolled into the sun for daily, regulated sunbathing. Dr. Rollier found that morning sunlight was best, especially for beginners. He found that if patients' sun therapy was done in the heat of the day, that it caused a physically depressing effect. Early morning heliotherapy was very effective, even though there wasn't as much UV in the morning. Isn't that interesting? It was postulated, just a second. It was postulated that the success was partially attributable to the patient's immediate change from night to bright morning sunlight therapy. Again, there are more curative aspects to sunlight than just UV, right? Dr. Rollier's primary tools were sunlight and fresh air and rest. He also found he could speed healing by adding 3 more things. You could probably guess what some of these are. Number 1, the work cure, useful labor. We have organized, this is Dr. Rollier talking, we have organized manual work for the tedious hours of treatment. These occupations can be carried out even during the periods of cure with the necessary graduation and moderation, and far from causing any fatigue for the patients, they constitute, on the contrary, a salutary diversion which revives their spirits and favors the progress of their cure. It would be a great mistake to lose sight of the influence of illness on the mind of the patient. Oh boy, is that true. And not to take care of each one's psychophysical equilibrium. With patients, even bedridden, who are more than any other liable to get discouraged, the work cure is not only an incomparable stimulant of the moral condition, it is also a first-rate factor in recovery. It wasn't just exercise or work, it was useful labor. Application here, a couple of them. Patients didn't wait till they were cured to start working. They found that work was part of the cure. So, too, working for the good of others is part of our cure from sin and selfishness. If we wait till we are free from the disease of sin, we will never work for others. Working for others is part of the cure for sin. Application number 2. Like this image, you are going to see more photos which may give you ideas for setting up industries at our health facilities to increase the patient's physical, mental, and spiritual health. It enabled the Layson patients to help pay their own way. I'm pretty convinced it's going to go this way. Number 2, the social cure. Dr. Rollier found that when patients shared the same space, they recovered even faster. Social interaction helps to divert our minds from ourselves, from our condition. This image shows that it was combined with the work cure. Now, I have found by immense personal experience, when I focused on my sickness, I got sicker. So too, when I focus on my sinfulness, I get more sinful. Our focus and trust is to be on Christ, the great physician. I found that during my 1.5 years of sickness, the only time I felt relieved of my symptoms was at our weekly church potlucks when I got to socialize. Church didn't do it. Actually, my worst times was at church and Sabbath school because I felt trapped. I had pressure to stay sitting there and listen to everything without getting up. Number 3. A mostly vegetarian diet. He wasn't an Adventist. This was also part of the work cure for patients and or students did the gardening themselves. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg on Dr. Rollier's diet regime. Dr. Rollier lays very great stress upon diet and strongly advises his patients to adopt a lacto-vegetarian diet for the reason that it is non-toxic and thus relieves the body of very grave handicap. The writer's observation has been that most persons suffering from TB have been for many years victims of constipation and are highly toxic. Meat eaters, as a general rule, are that, according to Dr. Kellogg, constipated, because it doesn't carry fiber with it. The practice which prevails in most sanitaria of feeding these patients large quantities of meat, the writers considers most detrimental. The kidneys are already overworked because of the large amount of tubercle toxin which they are compelled to eliminate. All right, finally, before and after, with and without, here comes the proof. Surgical lung tuberculosis. Dr. Rollier asserted that he could cure all forms of TB, any stage, any age. Even though immobilized for many months in bed, his patients had good appetites and, get this, noticeably strengthened and toned muscles. That's without exercise, folks. Increasing hemoglobin content, diminished pain from sunlight, and sometimes totally relieved pain, swellings, infiltrations, and edema also disappear in TB lesions and bones and joints. So muscles without exercise? You know that just a few days in bed, and one day for some of us, just a few days in bed and muscles begin to atrophy and weaken. Think of the implications for our patients and families. You will also begin to see how many drugs may be avoided by using God's healing agencies. Yeah, we got a lot to go, and think on that. We don't know any of this in this age of pharmakeia. We can do so much better than drugs. We have such powerful healing agents at our command. Agencies that God himself blesses as we use them. All right, first case study. This young boy was 4.5. I'm going to read everything on this one, but some of these others, we're not going to because it's pretty much the same soup. All right, he had advanced TB on both feet, right hand, and left lung. Doctors were considering amputating both legs and right hand. Seriously? He had 34 TB spots or foci on his body. Cachexia, weakness and wasting of body. Osteitis, inflamed, enlarged bones. Periosteitis, inflamed bone membrane. Inflamed inner wall of abdomen and pelvis. Inflamed glands of lymph nodes. Very enlarged lymph nodes. And numerous abnormal body tunnels that have been burrowed by the tuberculum. All these issues on this patient here cured in 1 year at Dr. Roller's Sun Cure Clinic because they treated the cause, his sunlight deficiency, his nutritional deficiency as well. Dr. Rollier said, gardening and farming are suitable for convalescent lung and bone cases more than any other kinds of work. They all get so hardened by open air and sunlight, their muscles get so wonderfully developed, and such a high degree of resistance to disease and weather is achieved on their part that they are envied by many a low country laborer. I'm envious of this. You see that picture there, the second one, B, it's the same boy 2.5 years after he arrived. He's the strongest one, I read in one of the captions. This is from Fundamentals of Christian Education. Work performed in the open air is 10-fold more beneficial to health than indoor labor. Both the mechanic and the farmer have physical exercise, yet the farmer is the healthier of the two. Nothing short of nature's invigorating air and sunshine will fully meet the demands of the system. Sounds pretty authoritative, doesn't it? This is Dr. Rollier again. The air and sun bath is the most powerful of all tonics and health restorers. Who would have thought? It rebuilds the organism and increases its vitality. Children strengthened during the summer months by air and sun baths are hardier and can much better withstand all the illnesses that may affect them during the winter. The same applies to adults, he says. Can you think of any pharmaceuticals that can do this? He continues, in fact, the general health of Dr. Rollier's patients proved quite remarkable. Visitors often commented on the lack of coughs and common colds among children who were so exposed. All right, second case study coming up. First picture A, patient arrived with 42 open foci of TB. B, same patient after 8 months of sun cure. Look at that. C, after 13 years and retraining in agricultural labor. Well, 13 years later, he wasn't at the sun cure clinic for 13 years. This fellow never went back to the cities. Do you know why I'm showing patients here progress even years after they finish the sun cure? Because it demonstrates that the sun cure patients never developed cancer from spending so much time in the sunlight. More time and more skin exposure than almost anyone. These patients proved that cancer is not caused by sunlight, which adds to the mounting evidence that sunlight avoidance may indeed enable the development of cancer, just like its avoidance enabled the development of TB. All right, continuing on. He says, it is important that the convalescents should not return directly into the debilitating atmosphere of cities. With this in view, he says, we started 23 years ago the working colony of Layson. And since then, an agricultural colony in Cernay. In both establishments, all patients completely cured, gradually recover, during several months, the habit of working under usual conditions. He calls farm labor usual conditions, which is, hey, that was our natural estate in the Bible. Adam and Eve. This is the health care that God intended. Living and working outdoors is God's health care system for us. All the clinics that had children had an open-air school. Quite a view. Morning exercise was hiking up a mountain to school with desk and chair on the back. This was their uniform. Hats were for newcomers, not yet accustomed to sunlight, and when one simply had enough sunlight for the day. It prevented headaches, overheating, possible nausea as a result of overheating or too much UV when you're not yet used to it. They did become used to it eventually. This is free time. I've had this picture for years, and I finally noticed something just this morning. If you look closely, you will see that the majority of these children have bunches of flowers in their hands. This appears to be their morning task, is to gather flowers and take them back. Boy, that's quite a recess. This is one of my favorites as well, the SunCure Clinique manufacturer. This is a SunCure clinic that was also a factory. Now that is practical application of health reform. Wouldn't that be something to combine health recovery with industry? Everybody wins here. All right, third case study in the next slide. This fellow, he was cured in 6 months by the SunCure in Layson. His general condition was splendid when he was done. Just 6 months. Same patient 15 years later. He didn't go back to the cities either. You can see he's got farm implements there. By the way, this fellow, 15 years later, he still didn't develop cancer either. This lady came in age 20. She was cured in 1 year. Lungs were healed, splendid general condition afterwards. The third one is 14 years after the SunCure. This patient came back and worked as a nurse at the SunCure clinics, and no cancer. Arthritis deformans. This is Dr. Rollier speaking. This has yielded repeatedly to heliotherapy. Synovial effusions, excess synovial fluid in a joint, and spontaneous attacks of pain disappear, or else become lessened, as also do the swellings of articular bone ends, creaking of joints, muscular atrophy or shrinking, and pain radiating along a nerve. Unfortunately, I have not found any before or after images of arthritis deformans from this institute. Just what they say right here. War wounds. Those are soldiers there at Layson, at the SunCure clinics. In the domain of war surgery, the Sun renders immense services. We have observed among the soldiers interned at Layson that after a few weeks, get this, a few weeks of heliotherapeutics, penetrating wounds that had been weeping pus for 18 months and more dried up. The healing of indolent and recalcitrant sores, that means slow to heal sores, the disappearance of inflammatory residues and edema, the development of muscles, and the recovery of movement in articulations that had until then been ankylized or stiffened or fused were also seen. Recovery, disappearance of these things. Pharmakeia doesn't hold a candle to God's methods. Bone fractures. The favorable influence of the sun in cases of fractures has been well known for a long time. Thus, Percy, he was a scientist, noticed that fractures in patients who lay in secluded corner of the ward where sunlight never reached united very slowly. But healing of the broken bones took a normal length of time as soon as these cases were moved to the sunny parts of the ward. Open sores. Now, open sores are like ulcers, but not necessarily infected. Combined with the drying action of the pure air of high altitudes, which is free from microorganisms, the sun disinfects all sores better than any chemical product, and offers this further important advantage of never harming the cellular activity of tissues whilst destroying all germs of disease. Excellent results are obtained in cases of wounds and sores. Burns, open sores, in complicated fractures. Sunlight has helped heal them. We're going to need to know this because we're not going to have access to bone setting and screws and surgery. Complicated fractures. In cases of spreading, oozing inflammation and inflammation of bones due to infection, the sun cure is a valuable assistant used in combination with surgery. We're not going to be able to give surgeries, at least not in their institutions. All right. Sun cure practitioners use protective wire netting on wounds instead of bandages to allow sunlight and fresh air to speed wound healing. That means that bandages have been slowing our healing. Isn't that interesting? This is an exceedingly practical thing to know. This lady here, 41 years of age, vitiligo, that's the white patches you see, TB of the pelvis, 11 liters of pus drained from many abscesses. 11 liters. Oh, man. Bone caries of sacrum required patient to be immobilized on stomach 14 months. Cachexia, pleuropulmonary complications, empyema, and vitiligo. Cachexia is weakness and wasting of the body due to severe chronic illness. Now, the same patient you can see here is healed after 20 months. Vitiligo is mostly gone. This patient kept in perfect health for 5 years. We don't know what happened after that. This gal here, she had spinal tuberculosis, back pain, very active with early paraplegia and gibbositis. Gibbositis is a bunching out, most commonly of the back, as you can see there. But after 18 months, year and a half, of alpine sun cure, her paraplegia and gibbositis reversed. Now, while Dr. Roller is saying that sunlight cured a paralyzed patient, it wasn't as marvelous as it first sounded. It wasn't a severed spinal cord, rather a disease process that hindered its function. Now, here's an interesting case. We're going to learn something from this one. 2.5 years of sun lamp treatment directly to this right cheek failed to cure lupus. Lupus vulgaris is a form of TB. Now, why would I put this failure in this presentation? Because it's going to lead to a general healing principle concerning the proper use of sunlight. All right, here we go. It was cured in 6 months when full body exposure to sun lamp was added. All right, the principle: sunlight's greatest benefit comes systemically. Therefore, full body exposure is far more beneficial than just targeting a specific outbreak. By the way, I believe the cure would have been much faster had they actually used sunlight rather than the artificial stuff. You remember Adam and Eve in a garden in the sunlight all day, every day, naked. 15 minutes of sunlight a day to the hands and feet is not a therapeutic level. Sunlight is not actually a therapy. It's a vital, basic human requirement to function and prevent and reverse disease. We need all that we can get, whether we're sick or healthy. And you can probably guess what the merchants of Pharmacia say about lupus. Remember, lupus was cured here in 6 months with just sunlight. Ready? This is what they say. While there's no cure for lupus, current treatment focus on improving quality of life through controlling symptoms and minimizing flare-ups. Read drugs. This begins with lifestyle modification, including sun protection and diet. Shockingly, they recommend that lupus patients stay out of the sun. Yet sunlight was the only thing proven to reverse it. Their conditions were enabled in part by sunlight deficiency. Every single one of Dr. Rollier's patients arrived sensitive to the sunlight. TB, lupus, etc., etc. It was all the same soup up there. And yes, there is more than one type of lupus. But no matter what labels are attached to the numberless illnesses, disease is caused primarily by two things. And what are those? Toxicity and deficiency. You deal with those, and disease may be prevented and reversed. That's God's system. That's God's method. I'm going to say this carefully and slowly. We do not overcome so-called sun sensitivities by avoiding sunlight. That is the doctrine of devils. We deal with the cause of the negative reactions, and sunlight is not the cause. The solution was simple. Dr. Rollier simply placed his patients on an anti-toxic vegetarian diet and introduced his patients to sunlight very, very carefully, very slowly, starting with the feet for 5 minutes. A small amount of skin exposed for a short amount of time, and just take it from there. He had a system, which one of my other presentations describes. Ankylosis is an abnormal stiffening and immobility of a joint due to fusion of the bones. Fusion. The sun cure, according to Dr. Rollier, is the best treatment for preserving the mobility of the joint. We have seen old ankylosis of the shoulder, elbow, wrist, hip, foot, and even the knee yield to this treatment, with recovery of partial or complete joint function. Do you understand what this just revealed? Sunlight can accurately separate joints and bones that have been fused together. How does sunlight know how to do that? God said, I am the Lord that healeth thee. I believe it. We had a patient at one of the lifestyle centers I worked at. He had a debilitating case of ankylosing spondylitis. Had we known about the Laysan Sun Cure then and started the patient on consistent full-body sunlight, that patient may very well have recovered and may never have needed his eventual joint replacements. We were all under the false idea that 15 minutes per day of sunlight to hands and face was all that was needed to remain healthy and recover health. Yet the results at Laysan were not accomplished with 15 minutes a day to hands and face. The list of just the categories of today's drug options to treat ankylosis and spondylitis is too long to even list here. That's just the categories of them. Sunlight replaces them all. The next 3 slides are the most amazing of all. And as we begin our approach to the end here, we're almost done. Sunlight in both rickets and tuberculosis has an indisputably recalcifying? Did that say recalcifying? It did. We can't just run past that one. Sunlight in both rickets and tuberculosis has an indisputably, in other words, no one can argue it, recalcifying action on the bones. This is getting interesting. It's most evident in a collection of more than 50,000 x-rays which we possess. In many cases, for example, where the head of the femur, that's the big leg bone here, has almost disappeared, the reconstitution of the bone, yes, reconstitution of the bone, is so complete that one may, without exaggeration, term it restoration to original condition. This is magnificent, life-altering news. Think of how different our medical work can be with this understanding. Here's another example. A 30-year condition, arthritis of the knee with bulky fungus. I have no idea what bulky fungus means. This was translated from French to English via Google. Couldn't find anywhere bulky fungus. Anyway, the structure here is completely erased, and this is the words of that book. The structure you see is completely erased. What are you looking at? What is that in one? It's the same leg as picture 2, but picture 2 shows the bones in the right shape, the right form, it's all there. But it's just this blur, and it's sunlight reconstituted the bones correctly is the point. In 10 months, you will notice the sharp outlines of the bones. The bones of the first image are so diminished in density that parts of the bones seem to be transparent to X-rays. It's so transparent, we can't really even name what bone is that. There's supposed to be 2 there. Finally, this one, before sun cure and after sun cure. Right shoulder arthritis, partial destruction of the head, pronounced humerus atrophy or shrinking. Slide on over to after the sun cure. Oh my word, look at what you're seeing there. Healed in 18 months, reconstitution of the head, recalcification of the humerus. Look at how much bigger, thicker, and less transparent it is to x-rays. The head of the bone is there, folks. Has any modern day medical professional told us anything like this ever in our lifetimes? This is phenomenal news. Do you understand what this means? It means that we may not have to have joint replacement surgeries if, you know what I'm going to say? If we would only trust in God's provisions for our healing. It takes time. God has made provisions for disease, even this. So, not only do the muscles grow without exercise, so do the bones. Sunlight reverses osteoporosis, low bone density, without resistance training or muscle use triggering it to grow. Think of all the pharmaceuticals that can be avoided here. There are so many wondrous things that sunlight can do, far beyond what we have talked about here today. So in conclusion, we're just going to review just 4 things that were talked about. Just 30 seconds here. 1, sunlight can do what? It can cure an incurable multi-generational disease. Number 2, sunlight can strengthen and tone muscles without exercise, even when bedridden for months. Sunlight can accurately separate fused bones and joints. Number 4, sunlight can regrow worn away bones. And folks, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what sunlight can do. What hath God wrought here? And what is man that thou art mindful of him? For we have a God in Israel who is mighty to save. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. And it is he that healeth us. And the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. Thank you for watching this presentation. Before we end here, I'm going to tell of the next presentation, just give you a little glimpse of what's coming. Cancer and God's Healing Sunlight. Let me just read the description, and then we will be done. Have you ever questioned the medical science that would have us believe that our all-knowing, all-powerful, loving God created our sun to burn us, age us, blind us, give us cancer, and kill us? Well, it should be questioned. God actually commands us to test every spirit. So that's what we will do in Cancer and God's Healing Sunlight. And if there is refuting science to these long-held medical assertions, we'll use that too. This lecture will include historical stories of some of the surprisingly simple, light-related things people have done to trigger cancer. And some of the surprising, simple, light-related things people have done to prevent and reverse cancer. Looking forward to this. Thank you.